Well, now that all my college news is in, I've already committed and the final schools got back to me, it's time that I make a video that just details the entire 3-year process, everything from my commitment to my final decisions to my first college tours and how that all played out. First of all, I want to preface that I only applied to 13 schools, and there were, 2 schools, Oswego and Oneonta. Probably not going to mention them again because even though I got into both of them, and got, decent scholarships from both of them, they weren't exactly, great schools. They were just safety schools for me personally. And there were other schools that I didn't apply to that I was thinking about. Penn State, I was considering going there, but my parents wouldn't make a college tour in August 2021 when we were close. We never got back to it, and then I guess I became enough of a Michigan fan that I wasn't looking at Ohio State or Penn State by that point. And Ohio State's another school that I consider for this. Schools I could apply to were select because of my restrictive atmospheric science major. I didn't want to apply to any Southern schools, so that cut off the University of Miami and Georgia Tech, the University of Oklahoma, and the University of Texas. Cut off all those schools from me as well. And there are probably a few other schools that I could have applied to. There's a random school in Mississippi that I could have applied to and chose not to. Western Connecticut I toured, but found it to be way too much of a safety for me, so didn't even bother with an application there, knowing I could get in somewhere else. And that sort of leads me to where I'm at, at this moment. So it's only 13 schools, really only going to focus on 11 though, the 11 that weren't extreme safeties. And first stage, of course, is the college tours. And the first time I stepped on a college campus was August 2018 at Vanderbilt when I was in Nashville, but I wasn't seriously considering it, and it wasn't really a school that I was even thinking about at the time. We just went there because it's such a historical landmark of the city of Nashville that it's kind of like how do you go to Nashville and not even set foot at Vanderbilt. Then 2021, more college exposure as to what a campus looks like when we were in Pittsburgh, as we go to UPitt and Carnegie Mellon, and of course going there when it was 90 degrees was not fun or pleasant. The other thing about this is that neither of these schools had the program that I wanted to go to, so I couldn't seriously consider them, but at least I got a breadth of what college could look like. Then we get to the University of Washington in February 2022. So, February 2022, we took a trip to Seattle from the 19th to the 24th. Obviously, the 19th to the 24th of February is during our school's February break. And there are a few things about that trip. First of all, it was near record cold on a tour. The low temperature bombed out to 23 degrees, which was a record back then. That was later broken. Oh, no, the low of 22 degrees was a record that still stands. The high was 36 degrees. That was a record, but was eventually broken the next year with a high of 35 degrees. But the low of 22 degrees was a record. I think 23 degrees was the low on the same date in 2023 because Seattle had 2 historic Arctic outbreaks on the same exact day in back-to-back years. Kind of tough to keep track of, in my defense. So this trip is significant because on February 20th, I leave the country for the first time by virtue of going to Vancouver, which is in Canada, and plenty of other things happened on this trip that were notable. It was my first time ever being in the Western United States as well. And on the 23rd, we toured the University of Washington. And this is why I fell in love with that school and it became my dream school. Did I wind up going there? You may already know the answer, but it was a dream school. I absolutely fell in love with the University of Washington. It was probably the most beautiful campus ever in a beautiful state that I really couldn't get, a good look at how beautiful it was because we went in February. But I absolutely fell in love with the school when I went there. It was crazy. Now, July and August 2022 saw me taking a bunch of camp trips to locations such as Toronto, South Carolina, Chicago, and even the southwestern United States, including cities like Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and Phoenix, as well as San Diego, but no college tours. You really can't do a college tour if you think about it. You really can't do a college tour when on a camp trip, because everyone has different interests and it wouldn't really be fair. Plus, people don't generally want to think about colleges on summer vacation, especially when it's 9th and 10th graders, because most people aren't looking into there. Nonetheless, August 18th to 23rd involves a vacation first to Montreal and later on to Vermont. And on the 23rd, when driving home from Vermont, we go pretty far out of our way, but it's to see SUNY Albany and get a tour of Albany. And it was decent, but I didn't love the school for SUNY Albany. Next up, on October 24th, 2022, on a very rainy Monday, we tour SUNY Stony Brook out in Long Island. So we don't even need a vacation to see it because it's within 50 miles of our home, but I just didn't like the campus. I thought it looked pretty ugly. Moving on, April 10th, 2023 marks Western Connecticut University, a school that I toured but found way too much of a safety for me to really enjoy going there. It was also the only school in New England that I was considering. Now, I actually found this out from a college fair in March 2023 that I went to. It was that school plus either Oneonta or Oswego, one of the two, I found out at that college fair as well, but didn't really make a difference in the long run with this college fair. I mean, I get why the school offered it because for many people it does help them, but for me it personally didn't. Now, as you go on, again, the schools that I go to become more dynamic. August 19th to 24th, 2023 is a trip to Minneapolis and Iowa, specifically for my Iowa State College tour on August 22nd, but flying out, there was no direct flights to Des Moines on a Saturday, so we just decided to fly into Minneapolis and then go down to Iowa State on the 21st. Plus, I had never been to Minnesota before. So that was interesting. And again, I like the Iowa State campus, which is hard to do when the heat index is bordering on 120 degrees. But I did. But I found it to be like, there'd really be like nothing around it. And I truly do mean like there was nothing around it. At least the other schools, you were like close to something else, or there was something else right where you were. Iowa State, it just wasn't that way. 40 minutes from Des Moines, and I went to Des Moines on the 23rd, and there wasn't really a whole lot there either. It's 3 hours from Minneapolis, which is the closest, major city to Iowa State. So that was that. And then, of course, we go into 11th grade, which is, again, that really important year for colleges, as we head into there. And, again, not a whole lot at first. But then February 2024, the 19th and 20th come in with college tours of Maryland, although Maryland didn't actually offer us a college tour, and Delaware for those 2 college tours. Again, the Maryland campus I found to be really ugly, and the Delaware campus I liked, but I didn't exactly love. Then April 23rd to 27th is a trip to Denver. To see UC Boulder on the 24th of April. August 28th to 31st, really the 30th, but even the 29th we do to look at the University of Michigan. And then November 9th to 12th for college tours on the 10th and 11th at Purdue and the University of Illinois out in the Midwest United States. So again, that's all for my college tours, but there is obviously a lot of other stuff that you have to consider with this, because I skipped over a ton of dates. First of all, March 9th was pretty critical as the SAT date, which I did pretty good on my first one, got a 1360, and then regressed on my next two, which was June 1st and October 22nd. So, disappointing that I couldn't improve on my score, and that we also threw away money, couldn't even super score because it did worse in both categories. But again, that's just how it is sometimes. And I wasn't going to take it a fourth time. If I was, I should have just taken it in May and not waited until June. Regardless of the facts, and then obviously, as we progress through March, we do start seriously talking about actual college application stuff at our school. My first rough draft of my personal narrative I make in late May, and on August 23rd we would undergo corrections of that to make it submittable. The Common App opened on August 1st, and by late September I was already able to submit applications. So I guess while some would say it started in February 2022 or even earlier, and others would say it started in March, the first application being submitted in that process was September 24th for Iowa State. And the reason why I had it first was because the other ones I wanted to proofread, but Iowa State had rolling admissions, so I know pretty quickly. And sure enough, on October 3rd, I'd already been accepted to college, and I already knew I was going to go somewhere. I already knew that by October 3rd, which was pretty nice that they had rolling admissions and that I was able to find out, so early. And later on, I found out that I got, scholarship money, which actually at Iowa State amounted in full to $15,000. So it was going to be relatively cheap if I went, but did I go? So as September and October went on, I eventually submitted more applications, and then as the fall went on, I heard back from more schools. So then was a process where by this point I had, for the most part, submitted everything. November 19th was my last application to Cornell, so I had submitted everything. By that point, college tours were already done with, but there was still a lot to do after this point, because I still had to hear back from these schools. And after Iowa State, the next serious school that I remember that I heard back from was Albany sometime in mid to late November. Not sure when. And then the University of Delaware was November 25th. I wound up getting $5,000 in scholarships from Albany and $13,000 in scholarships at Delaware. But there was still a lot more schools I had to hear back from. Such as SUNY Stony Brook, which was at that point the toughest school I'd gotten into. They only have an acceptance rate of around 45%, and many consider it to be the best school in the state of New York. I got in on a $1,000 scholarship on December 13th, and I put that on my YouTube channel. And after that, I'm starting to lose track of every single school that I applied to. I don't think this should be happening. Because did I only hear from 4 at that point? I feel like 6. Okay, so I'm not missing anything because I wasn't really including Anians and Oswego anyway. And then, after that, After that, there was a gap. I remember after Stony Brook, there was a gap. Until January 22nd when I heard from CU Boulder. But going there was an impossibility due to the extreme cost of attendance and the lack of scholarships. It was just going to be literally unaffordable because I didn't get anything from them. And while I might get something from them, it won't be enough. Unlike one of those mini scholarships, I didn't get anything upon attendance. And then January 24th is the first disappointment in the form of a deferral from the University of Michigan. So again, my first, disappointment. Because before that, everything had been positive, but the University of Michigan deferral was my first disappointment. And then nothing else for months. So now I have to decide, well, what colleges am I actually going to go to? And we have to look at that. By this point, I'd established a target of when I wanted to commit. Early on, I wanted to commit at some point, in February. Later on, though, I was just like, February's too early. I'll do March. And at first, my goal was early in March, but then I realized that was also going to be impractical. I did wind up setting my goal for commitment by the 23rd of March. I wanted to commit by the 23rd of March. And this meant actually looking at colleges, and a lot of the admitted student days were in April. So that wasn't going to work. So when SUNY Albany was offering their meteorology program on February 17th, we went up to Albany from the 16th to the 17th of February in 2025. Went back up there. First of all, Albany does not shovel snow well, and the storm that was mostly a rainstorm in New York City was actually mostly a snowstorm up in Albany, and they don't shovel their snow. At all. I'm not even going to say, well, they didn't shovel, at all. There's really nothing to do there late on Sunday night, and the area is kind of a ghetto in the eastern parts of the city, which are very easy to trek into. And then their atmospheric science program I found to be overall mediocre. The drive on the way up was not a lot of fun because there was freezing fog most of the way up and ice even a little bit. And then on the way down, it gets worse considering that it is extremely cold as temperatures have fallen to the 20s, though I do hit the 30s close to Long Island. And more importantly than cold temperatures, there was snow on the side of the roads. No one could concentrate. The thruway was completely backlogged and we were forced to get off and take the Taconic. The Taconic had an accident, so we were forced to detour through Dutchess County until we could get back onto the Taconic. It was actually hell. And eventually we made our way down, but there were just tons of factors that made Albany not exactly a school I wanted to go to. And before I could get into my next college tour, another decision came back on February 28th for the University of Illinois. Now, I probably didn't get too in-depth on this, but I actually took a college tour of Illinois, and I didn't like it. I wound up submitting after I did it anyway because I found out that I'd done the entire application, otherwise I wouldn't have even applied to Illinois. But I just did not like the campus, at all. And by at all, I mean really at all. It was just an ugly campus. And not only was it an ugly campus, but it was also in Urbana-Champaign. Urbana-Champaign is about 3 hours from Indianapolis, 3 hours from Chicago, and 3 hours from St. Louis. Basically, it's 3 hours from any significant city. So I wasn't too inclined to go there. When I found out that they had waitlisted me, I declined the waitlist immediately. Because I was like, why would I go on a waitlist for a school I don't even really want to go to that much? And that clearly didn't like me enough to outright accept me. Turns out I'd be begging for schools later on this list to waitlist me, even though it wouldn't even matter because they committed by that point, just from the purposes of my ego. We'll get into that, but I am heavily foreshadowing. But then there's a University of Delaware decision day, or acceptance students day, whatever it is, on March 8th. So we had to go down on March 7th, which the traffic in Brooklyn is extreme, but then after that it lightened up. March 8th, there were disabled vehicles literally everywhere on the remaining part of the route once we got back into New York, so traffic was hell. And if I were to go there, which I might have just leaked too much, I might be using Amtrak. Let's just put it that way. I might be forced to use Amtrak because I don't think driving is really an option with, where it is. So, okay. So, the University of Delaware college trip was over, and then I didn't hear back from anyone for the rest of March. Until I heard back from the University of Washington on March 13th, which was an acceptance, thus making it, my next best school that I got accepted into, and I got a $3,000 scholarship. So while I was about to commit to Delaware, now my decision was more intense. And even though I wanted to commit by March 23rd, it was becoming increasingly unclear if I was going to be able to do that, because I remained so indecisive. Delaware was by far the more practical option, and yet Washington was by far more my dream school, and I got into both places. And Delaware, I got into their honors college on February 21st, which is probably tougher than Washington. Washington, I wouldn't hear back from their honors college until mid-April, and by that point I really didn't want to wait to commit there, considering that in mid-April I'll be on a regular vacation, thank God, in New Orleans, and I really didn't want the college commitment process to drag out even further. And Delaware I had just seen was Washington I hadn't seen in 3 years. I was so confuzzled. I needed almost 2 hours to sit down and actually decide between the two of them. But I wound up choosing Delaware. A lot of it came down to practicality, cost, location. My fear of flying was another factor. Maybe it wasn't a great idea if I didn't like airports and flying to have to do that anytime I wanted to get home as compared to an Amtrak. And even though it wasn't that much cheaper, it was a little cheaper, and I got more money out of them. Now, granted, Washington is a tougher school. Before I did that, I wanted to make sure that the other honors colleges I applied to I didn't get into, but Stony Brook honors I was rejected from on March 19th, and Albany honors I was rejected from on sometime earlier in March, not sure when. So it sort of became clear that I was going there. And I announced this on March 23rd because I couldn't announce it right before the 22nd because of reasons. But I decided to keep my pending applications open. And this turned out to be possibly the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. Because what followed was a series of disappointments. On March 27th, a rejection from Cornell. Now, granted, this shouldn't have really been surprising, given that my chances of even being waitlisted there were incredibly slim. Disappointing nonetheless, though. Then, Michigan. An application that I put some time into. I'd hoped that I could at least be waitlisted, just for, if nothing else, the purposes of my ego. I know I'd have to decline it, but at least waitlisted at Michigan. And I did sort of want to go to school. I did like the campus, but it was an outright rejection. It was an outright rejection instead. Maryland, and this is the 28th, Maryland was also held from the 28th of March, turned into an outright rejection, and this was both confusing and shocking. I'd expected to be waitlisted, but an outright rejection, I don't get it. Many people who applied to Maryland did so with worse SAT scores and worse GPAs. I know they did it early action, and I didn't because I wasn't confident in my SAT score, and I wound up going in test optional. But still, I thought I had a strong enough sample size. There are certainly comparable kids in my grade who not only got into Maryland, but committed to Maryland. And Maryland was certainly, are on the same level, if not even a little easier to get into than schools I'd already gone into, such as Washington. So I really didn't get it. I really didn't get why I got into Washington yet didn't get into Maryland at all. Ultimately, my decision could have come down to me applying regular decision instead of early action and hiding my SAT scores, and they actually won at least a 1370, but I was only 10 points off. I could have just decided to submit my 1360, and I probably would have had better fortunes if I had done that and then early action to that school, but I didn't. And the result instead, disappointment. And Purdue, which I realized that your chances of getting in were much better if you applied early action, and I didn't meet the deadline to do so. Well, that was a wait list. And Purdue is certainly not as hard to get into as Stony Brook or Washington. Not saying Purdue isn't a tough school to get into, but it's not like at the level where, I thought I would get accepted, or I wasn't sure if I would get accepted, but a wait list probably on top of all of that, which I obviously declined because I have already committed. It was just a series of disappointments. Next time, if you have pending applications for reach schools after you committed, maybe I would suggest withdrawing them, because the end result in many cases will be disappointments after you've already committed and when you don't really need to deal with all of it. Again, a lot of it leading up to March was a lot of excitement. March had quite a few disappointments.